Boys and girls, welcome back to one-on-one interviews. After a little bit longer break, we can say it was a summer break, we are going into the third season of one-on-one interviews, and I'm very happy that I can welcome a great friend of mine, Filip Ujaković, Pipo, currently strength and conditioning coach of Cedevita Olympia basketball, a guy with a great experience in basketball because he has been there for many years now, and we will now sit and talk about different things, a little bit about education, about his background, about his experience in rugby as a player, and of course a main part of the interview will be focused on the topics related to strength and conditioning in basketball. Pipo, welcome.
Hello, thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, perfect. Let's go back a little bit more than a decade ago, where we actually met each other. It is University of Zagreb, it is School of Kinesiology, where both of us studied. Let's go back and tell us a little bit why you selected University of Zagreb as a place to study, your formal education, and beside this background of yours for studying at School of Kinesiology, give us a little bit of your thoughts related to importance of formal education. Now you are also enrolled in the PhD program at the same university, so you can give us also the reasons why you decided to do a PhD studies at the same school, and that the place and the time is yours.
Thanks. First, I would like to start with I finished my PhD at March this year, so I'm not schooling there anymore. Well, I started in Zagreb because I'm from Zagreb, so it was kind of natural for us, and but mostly because Faculty of Kinesiology in Zagreb is very directed to strength and conditioning, and it's very directed to high performance. The other universities, let's say in Ljubljana, are mostly directed in a way of rehabilitation, kinesiotherapy, or working, training with elder populations. So that kind of my interest when I started studying in Zagreb was to become a strength and conditioning coach. So I wasn't really a guy that found that part during my studying. I went there just to become a strength and conditioning coach. My formal education was kind of my first great opportunity because I was very enthusiastic as a student. From part in classes, I always liked to demonstrate stuff, and I always wanted to be part of projects too. That conference that we have every year, there was something that very motivated me into studying. I always wanted to be directed into strength and conditioning.
Mm-hmm. Perfect. And what are your thoughts on formal education? How important it is for a young strength coaches?
Well, maybe a lot of coaches, especially coaches that didn't finish formal education, are not going to agree with me, but I think it's crucial. I wouldn't go as far to say that you can't be a great strength and conditioning coach if you didn't have formal education, because there are strength and conditioning who do not have formal education. But I believe it's very important because in our way we studied for 5 years. Our formal education of master's degree and specialization in strength and conditioning lasted for 5 years. And and at that time, you actually have time to go thoroughly through mechanistic variables of body and how does it work. I don't think you have that time to do just that when you actually start working as a strength and conditioning coach. So that kind of mechanistic stuff is very important in our decision making of how are we going to act and what are we going to do during our planning and programming of training and seasons and everything. So I believe it's very important. It's not like I don't think informal education is not important. It is part of our education throughout until we're going to work as strength and conditioning coaches, because it's kind of add to that base of formal education. But yeah, I think it's very important.
Okay. You made a step forward And you applied for PhD studies. You successfully defended your PhD thesis, and now people can call you doctor. So, Dr. People, please, please tell me how important it is for your daily work. Is it related at all? I have my opinion on that because I have a diploma too. But before I share, or I don't even have to share my thoughts on it, I would like to hear your thoughts on the importance of having a PhD diploma in your daily work with now Cedevita.
I don't think it's important to have a PhD diploma, but I think it's very important to understand how science works. And when you, obviously, which I'm very glad that papers, science papers and sports science is very in kind of part of strength and conditioning, very important part of strength and conditioning. I think to understand how does it work and what does that information gives us, it's very important. To finish it, it's not important. Like our Professor Marković always says, when you finish PhD, it's actually when you start working on your science. It's not that it finishes with your PhD. So I wouldn't say it's important to finish it. I would say it's important to know how it works. And I think that's a great base to know how it works. So it is, for me and the way I work and my whole team here, our team is not just my team, it is very important part of our work because, let's say, in practical ways, we decided this year to work on blood flow restriction, and we gave each other tasks on what part of blood flow restriction are we gonna go through, and so we went through some science and papers that did blood flow restriction, and it is definitely, so we can say that science part of training is part of our planning and programming of training. So I believe it's very important.
Yeah, makes complete sense. Let's talk about something that I mentioned in the first part, where I said that you had a rugby background, which is not a very popular sport in Croatia, but definitely it is an interesting team sport to play and to work with the rugby players. So how much it had impact on your profession, and how did it help you grow in the field of strength and conditioning?
Well, it did help me grow at the start because my first clients were my friends from my club, so I started working with them. So my first mistakes as strength and conditioning coach I did with my friends in my club. So in that way, but thinking as like technically in strength and conditioning, it didn't really help me. You know, there are similarities of contact and stuff, and similarities that all team sports have and all sport movement, but I wouldn't say it helped me in a way that I implemented a lot of rugby stuff into basketball training, not that. But what it did help me is to understand how team sport works, that conflict, physical and verbal, is part of sport and it's nothing dramatic. To learn how to cooperate with head coaches, to learn how to actually talk with players. There in rugby I learned that love towards players is the most important thing, and when he feels that you actually care about him, he's gonna give himself to you, and without that you can't really work with players. I learned all that playing rugby. So that kind of communication and culture in sports, that's what rugby actually gave me.
That's a really nice answer. Let's talk a little bit about the position of strength and conditioning coaches currently in Europe. We are now in 2021. Maybe someone will watch this in 2031, if YouTube will exist in 10 years. So let's talk about position of strength and conditioning coaches in Europe. You can compare it maybe with some of the experiences that you know from other continents, other leagues. Doesn't matter if it's a Chinese league or NBA, or you can focus only on the European soil. I would like to hear your opinion. How do you see the positions? Where do you see field going in the next 3 to 5, maximum 10 years?
But I think it's developing really fast. You know, there are a number of different jobs that are now presented for strength and conditioning coaches, formally educated strength and conditioning coaches, like rehab coach, like sports scientist in clubs, like strength coaches, or head of strength and conditioning, or directors of performance. Those are all jobs that are kind of opened. When we started studying, there was just strength and conditioning, and that was it. Now our field is kind of being more diversified. We are still generalists. We are not specialists in the field. You know, like we talked yesterday about how much of nutritionist are we in our clubs if you don't have a nutritionist. So we are still a lot of generalists, and I think the field is going to go into really specialization for you know, if you want to be a strength coach, if you want to be science guy or whatever. And so I believe it's something that what tells us that we should definitely be directed into science more than practice, because you will have time to study your part of whatever you do very thoroughly, more thoroughly than we did, because we had so many fields to cover. And so I think the science will implement a lot into what we do, and of course data, which is penetrating our field very, very aggressively. What I think will happen to us coaches, as generalists as me and you, I think our future is going to be kind of leading those guys, maybe, you know, as head of performances, of directors of performances, something like that, because you can actually say that you were in each of that fields. So I think those guys that were strength and conditioning for last 10 or 20 years, in 10 years, are going to have jobs like that, because it's inevitable. As data comes, you will need more people, since somebody should be able to kind of lead those people. You can't have a data guy come to head coach. That would be exploding of information, or at least you have to put it through some kind of matrix and give it to coach.
Okay, before we go to specific questions, we will finish with this general type of questions. We take a short break and we come back.
Okay, great.
Guys, see you soon. Guys, welcome back to the episode with Pipo. Now we will talk a little bit about specific topics. We have two main topics to cover in the main part: testing and periodization. So let's start with testing. I would like to hear your thoughts and practical approach when it comes to testing. I know that your main two parts are testing for prep and testing for performance. So let's dig deeper into this field and listen to how you work with the athletes.
Well, first I listened to a lot of your podcasts, and I think it's what actually always goes is that coaches, when they finish when they're young coaches, finish their studying, they always start with, I want to test everything, and then in time they see the reality and say, okay, I can't test that much, and it's not real, and it doesn't give me that kind of information. It was opposite for me, because I came from rugby and I already did so much training without testing, and I saw that what Mladen Jovanovic always said, MVP, you can start with kind of minimum viable product, that you can start with something small and kind of build from that, and you always have some kind of, you will learn about your player, you will get to know him in time. So I started with that as a young coach, and I didn't have knowledge, and I didn't have any equipment to test, so even though you don't really need to have a lot of equipment. But in time I realized through my PhD and through my work that I need some information, and that basis of information will give me actually a better point of view, what should I do. So we developed here, I'm going to talk just about this year, not how it developed through my career. We developed here testing. It's actually not, it is for prep, but it's actually, I do it with my physiotherapist. It's testing for asymmetries and testing for performance. The asymmetries are my PhD, so I'm kind of specialized in that. So testing for asymmetries, it's actually pretty simple. We test range of motions of all joints that we think it's important for basketball. So hips, trunk, and shoulders. After that, we do single joint strength or local dynamometry of shoulders, elbows, hip and knees and ankles. And from that, we go to horizontal and vertical single leg jumping. That is something from which we get informations for main two parts. First is prep, so that I know their asymmetries and what are their kind of weak links. And second is that we have, when they're injured for return to play, we have a number that we need to get to return him to play. So that is part for asymmetries. For performance, I do all jumping, so vertical and horizontal jumping. I do 10-meter speed test because I think it's the only kind of speed that you have in basketball, and change of direction test, 505 test. With that, I do force velocity profiling from squat jump, but I think this is going to be the last year of that because I get same results for every player. They are all tending towards speed and not towards force, and they are all missing force in their force velocity profile. So I think I'm actually losing time with them, and they have, because it's jumping with weights, they have kind of, it affects them for next few days. So I actually do it all. I'm just gonna go without that next year, to be honest. And that is for performance, so that I know if they have weak links in performance. That's something that I do at the start of the season. What we else do is we test them 4 times a year for kind of global asymmetries, which is for asymmetries and bilateral differences. It's actually isometric squats, counter movement jumping, single and bilateral counter isometric squats, and we do asymmetries in change of direction, actually in change of direction deficit. So we extract from speed and change of direction, we extract that. So we do it because we have time for it. It's not a long testing for one player. It's maybe 20 minutes. You can test everything. And I do it at the beginning of season. I do it before FIBA windows because we have opportunity for that. In EuroLeague, you actually don't have opportunity for that. And I do it at the end of the season I love to give information to a player at what stage is he right now and what should he work with. I find it as my obligation during the summer. So I give him information from that testing, what I believe is his way through the summer, not only to players that are going to stay with us, but also the players that are going to go to other clubs.
Okay, I'm not going to bother you with programming for performance because we will not cover it in this podcast at least. Anyway, this is something that we touch many times in podcasts, and probably it's the core business of ours. Yeah. How you reach that players lift heavier weights or get more explosive. Some people use velocity based training. Some of them are just like, okay, I know that this is 40, 50, 60% of your 1RM and just let's play with it. 3 reps, 5 reps, whatever. Mm-hmm. You are working on ballistic stuff and so on. And I suppose, if coaches know something, they know how to train for performance. Then recovery, nutrition, testing, periodization, those things are a little bit more tricky. But I want you to give us the answer how you use this data. You can give us an example of player AB, doesn't matter who he is, but think in your head about one player who has these 2-3 asymmetries, or one asymmetry and one big problem, or he had surgery in the right knee and he has big asymmetry in between shoulders, and how his program looks like and how you apply it on a daily, weekly, or a monthly basis.
Oh, okay. So when I was kind of building my own kind of program for how it's going to look through the basketball, I realized that we don't really have that much time. We need to find space for us where we can put our work. You actually had kind of 2 times a week, you had 2 groups and fitness, and then you had your warm up for 20 minutes. And then I realized it can't be that, you know, you don't need to study for that. We have so much information in and knowledge that can be applied to players. And then the start of preparation or preps before practices started, and I realized that is a great opportunity for us to kind of give them more, to influence them more, to translate our knowledge to them. So I started building our preps, and I kind of develop it every year. So right now, let's say we have a guy that has a problem with Achilles tendon for many years. He has deficit because of that at one leg at knee dominant movement, let's say for quad, and he has problem with hip mobility because of that, because it always goes together. My prep is something where I influence the player best, and it always consists of main parts. They are maybe excluded if he doesn't need it. He comes to the prep usually around 50 to 1 hour before practice. It starts always with tendon work, because if you go through some papers about tendons, it always says you should do it when he's cold, because you have 20 minutes of time to kind of give information to tendons. So he always does it before rolling, because before everything we do. It depends on at what stage is his tendon. If it's chronic, then we do a lot of isometric. If it's not chronic, we do a lot of eccentric and concentric controlled tendon. After that, he goes to rolling, and then mobility, whatever deficital mobility he has, we work on that. If he has, some exercises specific are not very important for this topic. After that, it's very important for me. I'm dynamic neuromuscular stabilization, DNS, influenced me a lot, because I realized through it what breathing is and how much it's important for core development. So we always start our core work with DNS, some bird dogs or bears positions, and it's always about breathing. It's not about movement, and that's the most difficult part to actually teach them, because they always just do stuff, and it's hard for them to kind of get quiet in their mind and think about breathing and how the 3D breathing from which they could brace to certain movement. And it's actually a year-long process. I actually put them in position, say it's about that, and just look at him when he works at it, and then come to him. I palpate him and say try that, and I actually managed to teach them that. I need like 3 months, and they get actually pretty good at it. After that, they go through some kind of core combo. It's always something different. I have like 10 different cores on the wall, and they always choose something different, which I think it's very important to always put some different info for core. And I say you can choose whatever you feel that day, but it's very important that you change every day. It shouldn't be one core combo throughout the year. After that, because we covered mobility, we covered core, we covered breathing, we covered tendon, then we go to dynamometry, deficit, and asymmetries. From that, we just do exercises like if it's a groin, we go through some Copenhagen progression. If it's hamstring, we go through some Nordic progressions. If it's quads, we go through some skater squats progression. And from that, we always finish with a movement that he actually lost because of that deficit, or kind of jumps, or teaching them plyometrics or drop jumps. And what I realized in years of coaching is that we shouldn't really be afraid of plyometrics when we're not that warmed up. Nothing really is going to happen. He's not going to jump for 200 times. He can do 20 jumps controlled, and it's going to influence his mechanics so much if he thinks about it and he feels safe in it, and he can kind of examine his movement and see where is he missing a link. And when you say information like push that knee forward, it's not a problem. And he's always like, I didn't know that my knee can go through the toes. That kind of things that they learned in college or whoever was coach during 90s, when that was very important thing.
I have to be honest, even in 2000s, I was pretty influenced by it. There was still like this philosophy of no knees over toes thing, like lunges. If you see someone in the gym and he's lunging with knees over toes, you go like, oh, look at this, he doesn't know how to perform lunges. And then later on you realize, man, this is the most important thing
who actually changed it for me was Lee Taft, because I saw the video from Lee Taft at one point, and he said, how can you change direction if you don't push your knees over toes? It's impossible. You can only change it backwards. You can't change it in like 45 or 90 degrees. Then I realized, are we really developing strength in movements that we don't actually do? Because you actually need to push that toe to kind of explode in the other direction. And why do we mobilize the dorsal flexion if we don't need it? So the big part was, don't push your toes forward, and you should mobilize your dorsal flexion. So that's very funny, but that's how some practice develops. So I think it's normal. And I ended up with that. And with kids, that is with young players, our prospects, that is part when I teach them movement, from Lee Taft's change of direction movements, which I think it's very important for us strength and conditioning coaches to take responsibility to teach them how to move in defense, because nobody else will actually. When you come to this level, coaches are actually very directed towards attack and stuff with ball. Nobody actually teaches you how to stand and move in defense. So a lot of my preps is that, to teach them how to land, to jump. And I realized I had one single case study where I just taught a guy how to counter movement jump, and he added like, I think 15% of jump, which is, you can't, it's a great result for plyometric program, not just teaching them how to jump. So I think all that is very important, especially when you work with young players. But even older players, when they come, they realize you can help them that so much if you teach them something new, because actually you have players that never worked in like SAQ grids and stuff like that. When they learn some new movements in those, and they become familiar with it, they actually enjoy it very well, and it's a great set of movements which they can apply it for warm-ups for the games and trainings, and they feel more comfortable, more engaged into training. So those are kind of if we don't talk about conditioning, and if we don't talk about strength work during the season, that is the main part of my work, where I work with them. And it's great because it's individual for each one of them. And I change it during the say. You said, how do I do it through the year? It's actually, I change it 5 times a year. They have like 6 to 8 weeks to do it. And I realized that after 15 times that they've done the prep, they actually become very familiar. After 20 times, it becomes boring for them. So it means they actually adapted to it. So I need to change it. So I actually change it every 2 months. For 2 months, the only thing that they change is core. And if some new injury happens, then I add stuff and change it.
Okay, that's perfect. Let's go into topic number 2. Periodization. We cannot talk too much in advance about periodization on the macro cycle level or full season. I mean, basically we can. It depends completely on the calendar. You take a look at the competition calendar, and then you can say, okay, in these months maybe we will work a little bit more, or okay, in these months maybe we will unload a little bit from practices because there is so many games, and basically you can make conclusions in 3 minutes. If you go further than that, makes no sense, because sometimes you can have residual fatigue coming into the most important month of the year where you can work. Let's say it's February, okay, and you think in September, okay, February will be another month where we increase the volume of work, but then for some reason, maybe some of the guys were injured in December. In practices, you didn't have many substitutions. January was quite demanding. There were 2 games won and lost in overtime, and you come in February completely dead, and it should be your max volume month. I think it's okay, we can talk about it, we can share knowledge, we can share ideas, because that's also an important part when you communicate with your fellow strength coaches. But I think to plan a big cycle in advance, I'm not going to say it's useless, because okay, it's good to have some kind of picture in your head where you want to go, but I think the most important part of periodization when it comes to elite basketball teams in Eurocup and Euroleague is all about microcycle level, definitely. Weekly plans are mandatory. Moving maybe into direction of mesocycles, and mesocycle for me in this case is 2 to 4 weeks, not more.
Yeah.
So
actually moving from them, actually not to them. But what I like you said all that, because I saw a post on Twitter from Vern Gambetta, I think it was 4 weeks ago. He said, which I definitely, and some part doesn't go together, but at some point I actually agree with him. He said that periodization is not scientific concept. It's actually a pedagogical concept of our managing training in cycles, which I agree, especially when we talk about team sports. We can't really talk about scientific concept of periodization if you have so many variables that you can't really control. So we have to talk about things that we can measure and things that we can control. Everything else is just fiction, and we're not here to talk about fiction. On a year level, what I actually do, I go through the year level, and I think it's more manageable on Euro Cup level than it is on Euro League level. Is that we have FIBA windows. We can do stuff in FIBA windows. Although in FIBA windows we have players that go to national team, what can you do? But in terms of, especially in managing prospects and youngsters in FIBA windows, you can hit them hard there. Also, what happens for us this season is that first 3 weeks of first part of the season is without Eurocup, so we have one game, Saturday game a week, which is great. You can actually prolong your preseason in that, because you have in a week you can have 3 hard intensive practices, which during season you can't even dream of. To somebody give you 3 hard practices in season would reinvent your team. So it's impossible. So I think. It absolutely depends on calendar, of course, because we are we live in brackets of our calendar. But you've been last year in Eurocup, this year you're again in EuroLeague. Congratulations on both parts, winning and giving yourself back and doing a new contract. But you've been to Eurocup and you saw that you have the window of 2 weeks can actually help you there. EuroLeague is something different, because especially when you're in Spain or in these really tough leagues like Spain or Turkey or Germany, who now has more and more really good teams, you can't really cope with long-term periodization. So you actually kind of work on short term. Definitely on microcycle. But what I do, because you asked me, let's not just theorize. I take a mesocycle for 4 weeks, and I see first where my games is. Then I look at where my trips is. Then I put off days, which is very important. So this is what I want to manage with my head coach. Let's see where we can do off days. From that, I put day before practice, so day before game practices, and then I see where my space is to actually hit them. And then I talk with my head coach and say, we have opportunity here to have maybe 2 practices, and it could help us, and maybe we should, hit them hard here on Monday, maybe do some extra conditioning as a warm up, and then afterwards we will taper it to the end of the week. Or where am I going to put 2 groups and give a hard force direction of weight training. Everything else is actually what I program as a strength in a strength wise is I put what would be ideal for him to do in a week. I put it on the wall, or when we travel in my Excel, and then I go and try at least do 30% of that program. And he always says, okay, how do you feel right now? Let's do 70% of program. Let's say we have 4 rounds, let's do 3 rounds or 2 rounds or something like that. But with prospects, we always do everything. I think it's very important for a young player to work hard whenever he has a chance. And if he's going to play, he's going to play maybe 5 to 10 minutes. So we work on them there, or during. I exclude prep. I don't do prep. Let's do fitness. That's what I did yesterday. We'll see how it goes today.
Well, we are still in the preseason.
So from mesocycle we see that, and then on microcycle, I think that's the only timeline that head coach can think of, think in terms of. So when we see that, what is I think a very important topic for our strength and conditioning is that you actually program some kind of side programming next to your basketball head coach. You actually don't do it with him. You do a side project, and he does that, and he does whatever he wants. You can't really influence that much. You can just say, I think they're not going to be smart, and he opens a topic about it. But I'm glad that my coach loves to talk to me about it, but I'm sure there are coaches who are actually very kind of stubborn about how they should do stuff. So you actually have a responsibility, because you are complementary coach, that you work beside him on the next track, on a side track. And so you actually side program. So how are you going to side program next to the guy that's programming, and you don't know how that's going to go. So I think that's kind of very complex, and that's why we have to think only in terms of microcycle. So in microcycle, I do everything very, very direct. In each player is going to do that in that part. And I do so I take a whole week program and say he's going to do it here, he's going to do it here, and I actually tell them when they're going to do it, so they're ready for it. And when we get there, if they have some problem, then obviously you have to be a bit flexible on that.
Excellent. I really like the point how you explain the communication with the coach. I mean, with Coach Golemac, you work for many years now. Yeah. You became friends of the court and really good partners on the court. And still there is this gap between that you are not in the same track as he is, because his focus is always tactical development of the team, and your track is always keeping players in the best physical shape, giving them the intensity that they need, but not too much volume with that intensity.
Yeah.
So even though you walk hand in hand, I like how you said that you're not on the same tracks, which is completely normal, because his responsibility is unique and no one else has this kind of responsibility. His responsibility is everything together. Performance on the court, running on the court, and running smart, which means playing good offense and good defense. So there is, if we look only physical component already has many factors influencing that practice in basketball, because practices are stop and go environment, and it's never easy to control it. And then when it comes to coaching it, you have to maintain the intensity of the practices, the desired intensity. You have to keep the volume somewhat normal, but you have to give this informational component, which is huge in basketball, especially when you play every 2-3 days. You have to completely basically erase the programs from before, from the previous game, and introduce something completely new, or you go with some set of offenses that you used 1 month ago against one team, and now you're going to use it because this team plays very similar, and you will change defense according to new rules that you developed, blah blah blah. So there is millions of information influencing that given moment. What I wanted to say with this explanation and how you said that you're always on a sidetrack, I think that's the beauty of our work as strength and conditioning coaches, because it becomes an art of understanding what is going on, and art of communication with the head coach to explain him where he has this buffer zone where he can go more. Normally it's always more than you want, it's never less, but this buffer zone, and then you have to tap him on the shoulder and say, okay, this is now going into a very risky direction of losing intensity, making guys more tired, and so on. So I think this is something for me from today's conversation, maybe the most important advice for younger coaches, to understand that they will never have a situation during basketball practices to say, okay, I plan this and this is exactly what our team needs, because sometimes tactical part of playing 5-on-5 is not so good in a way that you're not getting that very intense transitions or running or whatever, and you as a strength coach, you have to wait that they pick the idea and they understand the tactical parts and rules, and once they get it, if it's something new, then they start running. And then you also need to be patient, and maybe if you expect 5 minutes after good warm-up they will get to my intensity, maybe not, because they still didn't get the rules of how to run fast break from this side, from other side, how to play defense, and so on. So I think every single practice in basketball, when it comes to playing basketball, doesn't matter if it's 3-on-3, 2-on-1, 4-on-4, 5-on-4, 5-on-5, we always need to be flexible, 10-20%, let's say, 10-20% to go more or less from what we plan. And then hopefully, if we have some kind of objective data on the screen from Kinexon, Catapult, or whatever the technology is, it's good. But also, I think looking blindly and saying, I set my practice to 3.5 kilometers and 550 meters in the red zone. You know, coach can always come and tell you, I need 5 minutes more just for this final touch in the tactical part. What can you say?
Even though you can say nothing, because whatever happens there, it's his responsibility. But it's our responsibility to give him information. I think that's where our responsibility stops. You can't stop. You can't stop practice. I think it would be stupid for you to get into an argument with him about the length of practice. For us, that's why we're complementary. That's why I say to Mladen Jovanović, the best part about your page is it's what its name. We are complementary coaches, and I don't think that's derogatory. I think that's beautiful, because we complement for them to have high performance, which is great. And so you should actually just give him information, but I think that information should be very simple and straight-headed. I think that's very important. It's too much. Let's say that he always asks me at the end of the practice, what do you think where we are? I think it's too much, but if you go another 10 minutes, it's going to be way too much. And he knows everything what I'm talking about. You know, just go, man. Just go. Don't worry about it. Like, it's pre-season. We need volume. So we need volume. This is part where we need, don't think about it. So there are times when maybe it's too little. So I think our responsibility to just give information, and we are here. And everything goes bad, we are still here, you know.
Yeah, I agree.
But it rarely goes everything bad, you know. It's human body, it's adaptable.
Exactly.
It's pretty adaptable.
Exactly, I agree completely with you, and there is so many things that we can use. Once coach goes a little bit over the limit, you can always instead of being offended, and many young coaches get offended. I mean, we were there. We were
Absolutely.
offended. We were there.
Absolutely.
I mean, I always say young coaches, and I talk about myself. I'm not talking about someone who I saw, and I say, oh, this young coach is making many mistakes. I'm talking about myself, and I can talk about you or my friends who I really saw how they work. But you can get offended if coach goes 5 minutes over the limit and then put your nose up in the air and say, okay, he doesn't respect me or whatever. But the whole point of communication, and what I said, that the social skills and understanding the communication and the intelligence of like emotional intelligence to understand what is going on, and you can see by the face, by the body language of the coach that he's really into this last part of the practice where he wants to give this last pieces of information that are crucial maybe for performance, and then you come and say, hey coach, we have to finish because it's already 5 minutes over the limit. Maybe you can go and tap him on the shoulder and say, coach, we are losing the intensity of running based on what you're trying to implement. I don't know exactly, but tactically, if you can move to half court, it would be perfect. So basically immediately, maybe you will get what you want, not in a perfect way that practice is over, but you will get less running without the intensity. That's the worst. That's the worst part of basketball during the season, to run without the intensity. And then you tell coach, let's move to half court if it's possible, because maybe he's teaching at that moment transition, and then it's not so useful, but maybe he will accept it. And if you approach in a smart way, maybe you will get something, and then in 5-10 minutes the practice will be over.
The thing is that you said you feel offended because he doesn't respect you. It's actually, you don't realize that you are offending him because you don't respect him, because you build some psychological knowledge construct that you think that you are actually managing this. You don't manage shit. I'm sorry about the word, but you don't manage anything. It's actually his team, and you need to help him. And so you shouldn't be offended by it. It's totally normal thing, and you should be glad that he's even listening to you. I think that's respect that you can get, and that's it.
Excellent. I love it. Let's go into the last part of the interview with some pretty simple questions. I would like to hear some of the names from the industry, coaches, strength coaches, or however their title is, whatever their title is, but coaches that you follow on Twitter, Instagram, maybe their pages, like Mladen's page is pretty popular, YouTube channel. Okay, just give us some names so young guys and me, we can write it down.
So I go always, so everything is very basketball connected. Lee Taft, obviously, because he's very important for
top of the top.
Top of the top when it comes to change of direction. Although he's very into tennis in the last year. Have you realized that? He found it as probably bigger money there, simpler money maybe. When I talk about when I talk about change of direction, I follow Dos Santos' science work. Is a scientist who only studies change of direction. I love Franz Bosch. What I would recommend, Franz Bosch has actually 3 books. Most of people think that he has 2 books. The last one, Agility Training, is actually something that I read right now. Sorry, Agility Anatomy. The second one, Strength and Coordination. And the first one is called Running, because he actually started as a running coach, and he's Dutch. And my wife is a Dutch teacher, and she read it in Dutch. That first book was actually originally written in Dutch, and she told me it's gold. You should read it. And I for years I tried to find it in English, and then they translated it, and I found it. And it's actually for a young coach. It's a great book to read, because he goes. It's not just about running; it's about movement, and he goes through such a wide spectrum of mechanistic variables, like physiology, like biomechanics, like kinematics and kinetics, where you actually realize what those terms are and how should you maybe look at a player. Not just, we always look at a player, well, most of the coaches, in a kinematic way, just how he moves through space, and you actually exclude physiology, you exclude motor control part, and you exclude the kinematic part of forces. And then you don't realize of how many things are implemented there. And he goes through them all in that book in a very, very simple way. And I think it's very important for guys that are starting to see what's actually happening with human body, not just in a way. And he goes through that in his other books, of course, but it's more complicated there. There is just very simple, and it's a great book to start with. I follow Chris Bishop a lot, Dr. Chris Bishop. Well, mostly because he's a kind of main character when it comes to asymmetry studies, but he also is doing a lot about strength and conditioning coaching as a term, and what are the practices in strength and conditioning, which you always want to see what are other coaches doing, like this podcast. You actually see what is his kind of way of thinking, and we want to see that in other coaches as well. So he's into that studying as well, and terminology, which I think 10 years ago was all over the place. Right now we are somewhere, we actually talk in the same language, which is beautiful. And obviously Mladen Ivanović, and with Mladen Ivanović I have to say the next name would definitely be Adam Virgil, who is absolutely fantastic. And those guys are actually helping us cope with data. Mm-hmm. And helping us cope with a lot of things that we actually took for granted, like let's say I talked with Mladen Ivanović, and he said, just tell me something about my programs, I want some feedback. And I said, I don't use a strength program planner, I think it's too complicated, but I like it not for me but for players. When you put it there, I want it plain and simple for players. You do this and this, but what it gave me a realization, what are all the decisions you have to make before you end the program. So you don't really have, he needs to do this. You have to say what is the tempo, what is the fluctuation of volume, what is the fluctuation of intensity, how are you going to progress your exercises. So all that is given to me just by his program, which he didn't give me a solution. He just gave me a program, and I started working. I said, oh my God, I actually don't think about it. I didn't think about it, and he gave me that. So I love those guys that are actually, I would say, they're pulling our industry forward. Mm-hmm. So those are guys that are influencing me a lot.
Okay, so I can see that you're a more pulling guy than pushing. If you say that they're pulling, if you're their coach, they would pull more than push.
Yeah, obviously, pulling is very important for stability of shoulders.
Perfect.
That's what Eric Cressy would say always. Another coach there.
I just listened to an amazing podcast with Eric Cressy on Mike Robertson podcast.
Okay.
They're big friends, and they were partners for many years.
Yeah.
Partners in crime, and they did an unbelievable podcast the other day. So who wants to listen to this episode, Mike Robertson podcast with Eric Cressy? I mean, it's always gold.
Too many goals out there, bro.
Yeah.
Too many goals.
Tell me, please, top 3 books. They can be field related or not related to field at all.
Well, obviously I said one, from running from Franz Bosch, everything that Franz Bosch because it's a different perspective totally. He doesn't go, you need to plan this and this. He gives totally different perspective. I love all the guys that everybody else love from coaching world, like Nassim Taleb. So his Anti-Fragile, I think it's a very important book for everybody, because there are so many dogmas that we actually have to cope with, and to be critical about each aspect of that dogma, you should actually turn your way of thinking on things. So he's very important. Jordan Peterson is very important for me. Just coming from to realize why are people coping with stuff differently, and how are they coping with them. It's actually a very important author for me, was favorite author of my wife. It's actually Erich Fromm. He's a philosopher and psychologist from beginning of 20th century, because you should just read him. For me to kind of explain what is he doing, I think it will be very helpful for coaches, because he actually makes it more sense for us what are we doing that it's important, because on a way you can actually lose faith in this way, in this work, because sometimes at the end point you don't realize what have you done, but he gives you a perspective of how should you value your work and what is really valuable in life, not just like love and relationships and stuff like that, but as how do we mechanistically in ourselves put value on stuff. So it was kind of big on me. Yeah, some other dudes as well, but let's not drop names that much. It would be very
Okay, final gems for the audience. Let's leave young coaches with some of the advices from your side.
Find a mentor. He doesn't need to be a mentor. You don't need to tell him that. Just be there and put yourself, let's just build a matrix of work that he does, not because his work is great. It's going to give you so much self-esteem when you get to your own project. You will start from somewhere. You know, you don't even need to know him. Just take something from somebody else and make it your own. I think that's very important. When you're studying, like your formal studying, put yourself into it, because it's gonna be a part of your every decision throughout the career. I believe that is very important. And third, find your friends in industry. Like find guys like you and I, like that you can come to and say, bro, how do you do that, bro? I don't know. Where you can be next, who you can be very fragile. For me, that guy was David Zupčić. He was actually my first assistant coach, but he influenced me so much because that's a guy that we actually go through ideas together, and he's totally different guy. He's not like a classic strength and conditioning coach. He's different in all kinds of way, and it's great to talk to him. Because he said, "Hey, but what about this?" And you never saw that angle. You never saw that. He always. And I call him, and I actually now expect from him to give me an angle that I didn't see. So I think those three things: so mentor, a colleague, and formal studying. It's very important in this industry. Probably in all industries, but we're just talking about strength and conditioning right now.
Okay, perfect. Thanks a lot, bro.
Thank you, guys.
Okay, today we spoke about brilliant topics. People explained us the importance of formal education. Okay, we touched a little bit testing part. I think it was unique in a way because we haven't had guests so far who does testing for prep and that much detailed prep and then testing for performance. I think he also shared the practical approach and how to put these results of testing into his daily practice, especially when it comes to prep. My favorite part that will stay for now in my head, but definitely I'm gonna write down some of the things that we discussed. For me, the favorite part was when we spoke about the real work on the court with head coaches, and when it comes to periodization, especially on the microcycle and mesocycle level, and being basically focused on a daily activities and one training session and following the plan, but then adjusting yourself to that given plan based on what you see on the court from the players and what you see on the court from your coach, and maybe what you see on the screen if you have some kind of variables. I hope that you also wrote a lot of notes, okay? And if you have that notebook, please keep it close to yourself, because I really hope that a new interview will come pretty soon. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Ajde, govorite. Top.